Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of Platform Enterprise. I'm your host, Rachel Donald, and in addition to this podcast, I also investigate all things political on the Platform Enterprise newsletter. Head over to www.platformenterprise.com to subscribe to both the newsletter and the podcast. Today I'm speaking with Safiya Kamaria, an exciting poet whose work is grounded in dance and culture. Safiya is nothing short of life-affirming, and this brilliant conversation ranges from the form of poetry to joy to the institutionalized hurdles faced by women and people of color in the poetry community. Keep your eyes peeled for her debut collection, The Inheritance, coming soon with Outspoken Press. I guarantee you'll want to pick it up after listening to her. Enjoy the show. There's nothing formulaic about poetry, especially
No.
not sort of spoken word poetry and the kind of poetry that, I've been reading yours over the past few days. And certainly a poetry that takes upon itself to speak about what is greater than itself. That's not the kind of stuff that you can just pump out 24 hours a day. It's emotionally taxing, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, it absolutely, and the content as well. Sometimes the content can be harrowing or distressing.
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes you might find yourself writing about something very small. Okay, so like a flower or a picture on a notepad, and then all of a sudden you end up talking about your mother or
Yeah.
your childhood. One thing I have been doing is I've left social media for a
Oh,
good
yeah?
time. I've been off social media for about 2 months now, and it's been wonderful. I've
Mm.
I my happiness has increased, my levels of anxiety have decreased,
Mm.
and I'm finding that I'm just cherishing the deeper connections between people and having personal conversations and enjoying the nuance in people's lives and also just small moments that we don't get that we don't have on social media because everyone's either just shouting at each other or
Yeah.
it's the big things, but like rolling up socks and ironing and going to the supermarket, just the everyday things, and
Mm.
and it's nice to just have that, those personal connections. I know that at some point I'm gonna have to rejoin, you or I don't have to, but rejoin social media to let people know what I'm up to if I do have something to say. But I think that I would like for most of my opinions and the things that are most important to me to be relayed in my work. And I would hope that that would speak for itself. However, one of the main reasons why I did leave, so I'll give you an example. A couple got married and they were sharing their pictures and it was really lovely and it was just a happy thing. And I scroll down and I see people making cruel comments and talking about how they hate marriage and which is fine. It's okay. Your views on marriage are your views, that's fine. But it's the way that people felt the need to present their opinion for this couple's happy moment. And then I find myself hating, not hating, well, I guess that's a strong word, but being quite dismissive and just I felt a sudden surge of anger at these
Yeah.
people being angry at the couple. And I thought to myself, okay, I have an option, I have a choice to just stop and to not continue this. I don't have to be angry. I'm going to back off because these things are designed to make us angry and to keep us in this state of flux. And I thought, okay, this is not only disruptive to my joy, but it's also disruptive to my creativity. I'm not able to focus because you're in such a state of vexation that it's actually very difficult to create. So
Mm.
I left and I thought I don't want to continue the cycle. I'm not adding, I'm not providing any value. And as a poet, an artist, dancer, I want to come from a place of joy. I want to
Mm.
create from a place of joy. And even if I'm writing about trauma, I still want it to come from a loving place. And I think that
Mm.
is possible, and the quality of the work will be completely different. So, because it was so disruptive, I decided to just take a step back, and it worked. It definitely worked.
Do you find, or did you find when you were on social media, And this isn't a line of questioning we need to go down. It's just something that's come off the top of my head. Did you find your work being
Mhm.
shaped by the things that you were perceiving? And what I mean by that is, if you take the poetry of Rupi Kaur, there's this whole like thing on Instagram of people writing poetry just like her, with the little
Mm,
drawings just like her, because that's kind of
mm,
how it's come to be ingested. And so I just wonder if there was any tension between like the poetry that comes from you and your
mm,
soul, and then
mm.
the work that you were perceiving around you in a wider community.
I wouldn't say there was tension. I would say there was a safe distance. I don't tend to engage with that poetry too often. I like to read poetry for the purposes of just ruminating
Mm,
and being inquisitive. And
mm,
I think that, not to be dismissive of what they call Instagram poetry, but I don't particularly enjoy being spoon-fed. I want to spend time with the reader's work. I've had this conversation before, and someone said, "Well, no, it's very similar to Maya Angelou," and I'm thinking, well, hold on a minute. So you're trying to tell me that poetry from a certain period by certain authors is simple, and and this is a huge problem, and then we start having these conversations about race and gender and what people are
mm,
calling identity poetics. I have a huge problem with people perceiving poetry, which is easy to read, as simple.
okay.
And I'm not saying that Instagram poetry is simple. There are some poems that are extremely profound, but I guess they are being commercialized in a way to make them seem quite simple. And that's what I hate. And everyone say, well, this is what this poem means, and that's it, and there's
Mm,
nothing else to it.
mm,
And I actually think it's quite demoralizing, but I champion work that is giving people a sense of agency to feel that they can write themselves. I am very proud that poetry is has become more available to people, and people are finding ways into poetry, especially through Rupi Kaur's work, and I think that's fantastic. Any work that makes anyone feel something is surely worth celebrating.
I want to go back to something you said, identity poetics, because I think most people know what identity politics is, but
Mm,
did you say identity poetics?
I did, yeah. So every poem, in my opinion, is an identity poem. But of course, people who perform identity poems are people from marginalized communities, people who, I mean, everything is political, but of course, people talking specifically about oppression tend to be grouped into this category of creating identity poetics. And it infuriates me because it's almost like it's given a bad reputation. Oh no, this, and you will hear this at slams. If you go to slams open mics, audience members complain about the fact that, oh no, we're going to get another identity poem again. Oh. And what's interesting to me is that if every single one of us was to write a simple poem about walking outside, walking down the road, that would be an identity poem. If talk about your surroundings, it's an identity poem. There are many white middle class people who have written poems about their gardens. That's an identity poem. The fact that you even have a garden, the fact that you even have time to write about your garden, that is an identity poem. It's saying a lot about you. But of course, they're not identity poems because they're not about
Mm.
blackness or about gender or about your orientation. They're simply, they're normal. They're perceived as normal, whereas everybody else writing about anything to do with marginalization or oppression. And it's a shame. It's a shame. I don't believe in the notion that one poem is about identity and one poem isn't. If again, going back to the analogy of walking down the road, a poem about that, if you're even looking up, that's an identity poem because you're saying that you're perhaps as someone who's a movement artist looking at noticing people's movements. If you're noticing things above eye level, you are most likely in a good mood, or you're feeling a little more confident. If you only notice what's on the floor, you're talking about depression, maybe. So that's an identity poem. So
But can, but then why would somebody's mood? Uh, this
mm,
is just Pure interest. Why
Mm.
would somebody's mood necessarily have to dictate their identity?
I mean, I guess this would be pertaining to a collection. If you know, the whole collection would be about your state of only looking downwards. I guess this would allude to something else. And of course, this is where the questions come in. You know, we can then question, and this is what I love about poetry. For me, the best poetry leaves questions. It asks a lot of questions.
Mm,
I'm just, you know, obviously giving examples, but I would love to keep asking these questions. Why are they focusing on the floor? Why are they not focusing on the sky? What's going on?
mm,
Like what are they
yeah.
not saying? And a poet who, you know, anything you put in your work, it's, you know, it's also what you don't put in your work, which is just as important. So yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that it's a shame. I think it's a shame the way poets tend to be pitted against each other, but it's all just poetry, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to ask, like, I'm surprised by the fact that an open mic or a slam, there would be
Mm,
a disparagement of
mm,
somebody's work, considering that's a community that's come together to
yeah,
hear each other and
yeah.
support each other. Why do you think there's this pushback? Because I mean, it's not as if women poets or people of color, or it's not as if they've been hogging the spotlight for centuries. It's a relatively new ability and right to get up
Yeah,
and to talk
yeah.
about your blackness or your queerness or your womanness. So
Mm.
why do you think there's pushback even within the community?
Jealousy. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I just said it. I don't
Of
care.
course you are.
Jealousy. It's jealousy. I've done workshops in slam and performance poetry, and one question that will always come up is, why is it that certain people always win slams and others don't? And I always, say, what do you really want to say when you say that? Let know people. What do you mean? And one one participant in the workshop basically said, okay, well, no offense, but only Black people and a certain type of woman wins slam competitions, and it's not fair. Like, why don't I win? And I said, okay, slamming, open mics, you're looking for immediate gratification. People need to understand your poem there and then, and they need
Mm,
to feel something. I don't do slam poetry anymore, but and it's this isn't poetry that you're going to sit down and take hours and hours to read and study. This is poetry that needs to make you feel something,
mm,
and it's a masterful art form. So I would never be disrespectful to the notion or the craft of slam and performance poetry. And I said, okay, well, what are you? And I asked the poet, I said, what do you write about? Do you write about anything you care about? Because I'm telling
mm,
you right now, I can go up on stage and I've done this before. I've slammed. I don't just slam about my identity, but I've slammed
mm,
about my love for music. I've done a haiku about Donna Summer, and I won. And she was like, well, how is that possible? That's not possible. It's because, surely that's just because you're Black and you can dance, and giving me all of these excuses. And I said, it's because I am passionate about that, and I actually care about the topic. Are you writing about things that you care about? And the
mm,
poet said, well, yes, but no, I'm also trying to talk about form, and my poems are artistically brilliant, and there's a lot of technique. And I said, is anyone going to get that when they're watching you? Are they going to be able to break down all of those different lines, etc., when they're watching you? And she said, well, not necessarily. And I said, okay, well, what about the theme? And she said, well, I think someone should be able to win a slam by doing it. And I said, no, 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 no. If you are not able to relay a sense of passion, and you are not able to relay a style or anything in a meaningful way, how do you think that people are going to be able to connect with you? So let's throw this around. Let's talk about the people that you keep saying keep winning and you're not happy about it. These people are talking about things that impact every aspect of their lives. If someone
mm,
wins the slam and they're talking about, racism, and they've literally just racism is a Tuesday. What this woman didn't realize, and I explained to her, racism is a Tuesday for Black people. We experience this a lot. This is something that permeates our lives. So if someone decides to go up on stage and talks about something that, anything to do with their lives, they're going to a sense of passion is going to exude from them. and they're going to be able to connect with the audience. So you're going to need to find a way to connect. It's all poetry is. It's about connectivity. You're finding a bridge. If you're not able to find that bridge, you can kiss your slams and your open mics goodbye. That's what people want.
And this seems to be kind of the fascinating thing that slam has done comparative to on a kind of old style of poetry. And I'm thinking immediately of like Sylvia Plath, who wrote books and books and books and books about her
Mm,
father, which was an
mm,
inherently like personal story and trauma that she just could not get rid of. And she was
mm,
writing for herself.
mm,
And she had that relationship with Ted Hughes, and that they were like the Sartre and the Beauvoir of the UK. You know, they were just feeding each other's careers. But she didn't have to write about anything universal, and poetry
mhm,
was the written form, and it was editing and redacting and extracting. And what slam has done has really brought forward like the stage and the performer and the audience and the communion between
mhm,
that. And I wonder if that's also why we've seen this kind of explosion of identity poetics, or people trying to expound upon themes and
mm.
expound upon politics, because poetry now has an audience.
Absolutely, yeah. Audience members, they want to connect with you. You know, you go to a play because you want to feel something. You don't go to a play or a show because you want to have a bad time. That makes no sense.
What has poetry given you in terms of a toolkit to confront these issues that you write about? Because I found this, I was going through your Twitter feed and I found this really, really beautiful tweet from you. It wasn't that long
Mm,
ago. And it was like, oh,
mm,
2016, I was into storytelling. 2017 was the first time I called myself a poet or a spoken word
mm,
artist. And now
mm,
I'm here and I'm part of this community that I was so excited to belong to. And I find that really, really beautiful and humble. So yeah, I would like to know what poetry has given you over these past 4 or 5 years in terms of being able to discuss and relate with things
mm.
that were perhaps you didn't even have the words for before.
For me, I think that I always wanted to express myself. So I used to, I still do. I'm a dancer, but dancing can be very abstract. You know, it's very difficult to decipher what someone's trying to convey through their dance movements unless you have lyrics. I went to an open mic and someone didn't actually show up, and the organizer said, does anyone want to share anything? Do we have any poets in the audience? And I remember my friends at the time, they said, oh, Safia, you write, go up. And I was like, okay, I don't have any poems, so I freestyled.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually freestyled. I just said things, and surprisingly, it was enjoyed. And I was told to come back. And I thought, okay, this is clearly this was something I was meant to do. Okay. And then I came back and I actually did take it a little more seriously. Obviously, I I had something else to say. But yeah, it was a strange moment, but it was also really it felt it felt like I was in a sense nurturing myself. I think it felt like an act of self-care, and this isn't to say that poetry is therapy because it isn't, but I felt that by giving myself the opportunity to write and say what I think I've always wanted to say, and had a purge of emotion, you start asking questions about your own work. And I noticed that the more I wrote, the more I realized I don't actually know that much. And that's a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling to feel that your writing is actually helping you to understand the world and make less sense of it at the same time. And I think that's what it's giving me. I think I've become humble, by writing. I think writing does make you humble. It makes you more empathetic to people's plight, and it makes you more understanding about human nature. I think I'm because of poetry, I'm more forgiving, I'm more patient because I've learned to recognize all of the imperfections in myself. So I think I've become a more self-aware person through poetry. I hope that answers. That was that. I was thinking maybe I was going to answer in terms of technicalities like syntax and metaphors, but no, that went down a more endearing route. So shame. Okay, there we go.
No, not at all. We're talking about, having a toolkit for expression. I think it's absolutely understandable. You would talk about feeling and what it gives you in terms of, yeah, how it can help you feel about the world. I wanted to ask you about the fact that women in particular are kind of coming forward to like dominate, the
Mm,
poetry scene. And obviously I was introduced to you via Lisa Lux,
mm.
and you have this community of women writers that support and empower each other. And why do you think that has kind of come about in the, I don't know, the past decade or so? Why is it now the space for women to step forward, and why do you think they've chosen this kind of ecosystem of nurture?
You know what it is? I think it's something that's always been happening, but now we've been definitely given a bigger platform,
Mm,
or the platforms, or we're less likely to be kicked off. Yeah, we're less likely to be kicked off, and the more of us there are, I think the harder it is for us to be removed. My biggest issue is knowing that people still believe one is enough or few is enough. So
right.
being a part of Outspoken's next lineup, we've had these conversations that we're very aware that okay, this is we're taking baby steps, and there's still a long way to go. We're still very much a minority in
Right.
literature, especially with new voices. I mean, you see these roster of poets, and every now and again you see a woman, and you think, okay, great, that's fantastic. But we're supposed to be grateful for this one, or
Right.
these.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, baby steps are definitely being made, and we're pushing, and we're fighting. And I think I wouldn't necessarily say we're louder, but yes, I think it is just not being kicked off as much, because
Right.
I'm also very aware of figures, powerful figures like Joelle Taylor and Bernardine Evaristo and Cat Francois, and all of these poets who have actually been saying the same things that we've been saying for a longer time, and have been, fighting the good fight, but simply being ignored. And I think definitely what needs to happen now is there needs to be kind of a reconciliation, and kind of like this. I don't hear many apologies. I would like to hear more apologies. I would. I'm going to drop the ball, and I'm going to say something that is probably a lot of people might be annoyed about, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's important. When there is a lack, and I've just wrote a poem about this recently, so that's why it's on my mind. But when there is a lack, what tends to happen is there tends to be an unhealthy amount of competition. And what that does is it actually causes animosity in the community. So on the other hand, while we have people who are coming together, there's a very strong sense of feminist collective, and on the one hand, yes, many people are rooting for each other. What you also tend to have is you also tend to have a sense of jealousy and resentment, because when
Right.
there's only room for a few women, you're wondering, well, why were those people chosen when we're all not? And sometimes I will say, well, I have a problem with the notion of jealousy. I get very mad when people get jealous. And yeah, the whole notion of jealousy just infuriates me. But sometimes it is warranted, because if there were only a few places for people, you understand why jealousy happens when so many people are working hard. The same thing happens in the Black community, and I'm sure every marginalized community. When you have special slots, okay, Black History Month, when you have special slots for a few Black people, you create a division within the community, because then all of the Black people realize, well, there's only a few places. So now we're not going to have
Right.
a sense of a sense of love towards each other. And I think that sometimes the same thing happens with women when you have and I understand why they're there. We need to have these initiatives for women's this and women's that, and I understand, but it would be a lot better if it was just more equal anyway, so women didn't have to keep fighting for these positions all the time. Of course, you're going to get animosity between women, and that's not fair. but it's done deliberately. So yes, I've just completely undermined everything I've just said. But no, it's you have a sense of community. You do. There is lots of love, of course. I have my sisterhood. I love everyone. I want everyone to do well. It's in it's in everyone's best interest that those who work hard do well. But at the same time, I'm very aware that there are initiatives that are set up which I believe actually cause a lot of harm. And if you're going to set up one initiative, you have to set up a good few 50. Because what you're going to happen is you're going to have a lot of people who are going to miss out on opportunities. And then, if we want to keep talking about women, let's talk about aging. Let's talk about the fact
Mm.
that if a woman has a child, she is less likely to sustain a career still. We have this in the literature community. Many women that I'm speaking to are now getting married and now having children, and they are texting me and saying, I don't know if I want to have children right now because I haven't released my first collection and my career is going to go down the drain. And you're in literature. And this is what women are worrying about.
Why though? God, the one sector you would think would be free from it. But
And
what hey, well, hang on, let's get into that. Let's get into the politics of that. Like, what is that? Because that's not readers don't care who's had babies. If I like a poet, it's because I like a poet, not because I care what's happened, down under. So like what's the issue? Is it with like agents? Is it with, the big traditional sort of like publishing houses and what they expect of somebody's quote unquote productivity, which you said at the beginning and we'll come back to. Like what's
Mhm.
going on? What's the problem?
I think, okay, so I'm not a mother. This is from having conversations with mothers, new mothers, women who have had children and now trying to get back into the industry, etc. Saying that they're less likely to be booked for gigs because people are concerned might be concerned about priorities allegedly and taking time out to have a child and worrying about going under the radar. Someone said to me, I'm worried that I won't be remembered again if I have another child because the last time I had a child people forgot about me. So I guess this does kind of feed back into what I was originally saying about having the constant need to have to produce and produce all the time.
What is that? Like, what is it about artistry today that means that you have to be in perpetual motion forward? Like, surely, the whole thing is you write a collection, you take some time, you promote it or whatever, you feel some stuff, you think about some stuff, you realize, how do you want to evolve? Because this is the thing, like, growing takes time and it takes
Mm-hmm.
rest. And as an artist, you don't want to keep reproducing the same thing. So, where is
Absolutely.
this push coming from that writers and artists and dancers like need to constantly be doing? Because it's contrary to where quality, as you say, comes from.
I guess it's this notion of being forgotten about, which I think is incredibly sad and kind of depressing. I feel that
Mm.
exactly as you're saying, we should be growing, we should take time out, we shouldn't be pressured. This is my fourth year in poetry, and listening to people who've been doing this for a lot longer. I remember the first conversations I really had were warnings. It wasn't
Oh
encouragement, it
wow.
was a warning. It was like, well, in spoken word, people are always looking for the best, the best new thing. That trope was quite infuriating to hear, and hearing from a woman's point of view, and immediately feeling quite empathetic towards women who are saying, well, I feel sidelined because I had a child and I took time out. And I felt I needed to then find my way back in. And I'm thinking, well, no, if you leave, there should still be a place for you. You should be
Yeah.
cherished. And I started asking questions, why do these women feel silent? And I thought, oh, there we go. Not being invited to perform, kind of being excluded. Who runs these events? Okay, the majority of people who run these events are men. They are men. The majority of poetry organizations, they are run by men. So perhaps that is not to say men are not aware, but perhaps that is a reason for it.
We don't have to qualify everything. The fact of the matter is things are going wrong in many
Yeah,
different spheres, and we have to start looking at
absolutely.
like, why. And it's not
I
particularly
know.
nice. Like I don't ascribe to all of the literature on like power dynamics, but it's not a nice dynamic to have
Mhm,
male-led organizing where women perform. Like,
mhm.
women's performativity and men's, leadership, that's not a nice dynamic, particularly.
Yeah, let's just let's call it for what it is. It doesn't look good on paper.
I wanna ask you about something on a individual level. So we've spoken about womanhood, you spoke about race, and the kind of thing with, like, globalization and global communications is even in, like, the UK, I think that when we're talking about race, we're still kind of looking at the US and talking about their race problem and not really examining our own.
Mm,
And I wanted to ask if you feel that people expect you, which is kind of this like reverse tokenism thing, like if
mm.
people expect you to represent all Black women.
It's extremely problematic, and this is why I'm always championing the idea of more poets basically sharing their stories. I was asked if there are stories that I need to that should be shared more, and I said yes and no. You can write about anything you want to, but also I'm very for the idea of Black female poets especially continuing the same discourses that we have in poetry. So if you see 100 poems about Black hair, if you see 100 poems about colorism, then 100 more, because we need to hear
Mm,
more opinions. I think it's absolutely hilarious that I can read millions of poems about wheelbarrows and the moon, but no one says anything. But yet
mm,
but we've heard this poem about Black hair before. No, you haven't. You haven't heard it from my point of view. Therefore, you have not heard it. So I'm very for poets, sharing as much nuance as possible and giving their own
mm,
perspectives, because blackness is often treated as a monolith, and of course it isn't. I think England is very good at at excusing themselves from every atrocity that they have caused in the world, and I believe that it's very easy for many British people to distance themselves, or white English people to distance themselves from various trauma that is happening elsewhere. So, for example, Black Lives Matter, and I remember, hearing an abundance of poetry from Black British people, and I remember seeing a lot of comments and thinking, they're talking about what's happening in England, right? You don't need to be talking about things that are happening in America to talk
yeah,
about, the pain that Black people are suffering in England, or anywhere else. And I feel that I've always wanted to be very detailed about specific nuances, so that to let people know that this poetry comes from me, and my experiences, and sometimes I will say this happened in England, in 1998. This happened in Barbados in 1994, and say this is my story. And sometimes I won't necessarily talk about race, sometimes I necessarily won't talk about gender, but if I do, then please listen. And if I don't, still listen, because
yeah,
this other problem that happens is that you're always expected to talk about blackness and femininity in a certain way, and when you decide not to, it's almost like, oh well, she's not doing that anymore, and then it's sad because people think that's all you are. All you are is your blackness and your gender, and I
yeah,
think that in my collection especially, I think one thing that I really wanted to bring forward for me was asking these questions about why these stereotypes, especially for West Indian women, and saying that, our movements, our, this what is perceived as vivaciousness, it doesn't necessarily come from a place of hatred, it comes from a place of love. So I wanted to bring about these new perspectives and ideas behind, all of these portrayals of us. And again, that's why I keep saying that I do believe that as many women should come forward and just give their own opinions, because there is an abundance of narratives and an abundance of way to look at things. Yeah, the main problem is that white English people tend to believe that there's only one way to see someone. And it's very interesting because they themselves, okay, so if you say, for example, a Londoner and someone from Birmingham, they're two completely different people.
Mm.
Someone who supports Manchester United, someone who supports Arsenal, they're two completely different people. They're like, there's so many different types of English people, right? There's
Mm.
so many different types of English people. There's no such thing as one English person, but blackness, there's only one type of black woman, one type of black man, and it's really interesting how one group are treated to another, which is so unfortunate and kind of ignoring all the beauty and all the histories and I mean millions of years of nuance and growth. Yeah, okay, thanks.
It's a really great point about diversification, and that is allowing for the multiplicity of individuality
Mm,
to come through identity poetics rather than it just being about whatever somebody can first see when they
mm,
look, and that's like beyond getting more women or more black people or more Indian people, beyond getting more marginalized people into a certain space,
mm.
like allowing them into that space because they're an individual first and foremost. Like that's the next step, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that even when, so Black History Month is a perfect example when you're asked to do a poem about race, or to celebrate your heritage. Sometimes I don't really believe that people really want to hear me, that people really want to hear what I really think. I think they want to hear a version which is palatable, and there's a difference.
Okay.
So there are some things that I might say, in my poetry, and it might be considered as shocking. It might be considered, oh, that's a little harsh. No, that's if you want, then that this is the thing. Be very careful what you ask for, because
Mm.
if you really want someone who has been marginalized to speak, if you really want someone, you say, oh, speak about your oppression, feed our need for us to feel like we're doing something. So tell us about your oppression. Many people won't be able to handle poetry. It wouldn't be palatable at all. And there are
Mm.
many times when I have been told to tone down. Yeah.
Your poem, tone down your poetry about oppression.
Yeah, tone down my poem about oppression. Maybe you don't want to be too graphic with that. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. You asked me what it's like to be called the N word. That's what you asked for. So here's what it is. So, it's this thing about saying, "Oh, we want black people." No, do you really? It's pretty like we want to hear what women think about men. Really? Yeah, you really sure you want that? I mean, Lisa's a great example. Do you really want Lisa to perform her whole collection? You won't feel good about yourself. This isn't what this is for. And I think people forget what it means to actually listen to people, to other voices. It's not all going to be fun and happy. And so I again, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I really questioned how much people wanted to change. Like, do you really want to dismantle your power? Do you really want to hear what black people think? Because I don't think you're ready. I think you're reacting. And this is the problem with immediate gratification. This is this reaction.
Mm.
I'm doing something. I'm going to change my screen black. I'm going to put up a hashtag. I'm doing
Funny.
something. Like, yes, yeah, that's you doing something. Good for you.
Yeah, totally. The concept of allyship has become, like, I don't even know, just sort of
Mm,
a battleground of opinion. And I think there's a huge number of people that like genuinely do want to do the right thing and genuinely do want to help and don't know how, and are maybe like scared to ask as well. I have seen, particularly in feminist spheres on social media, for example, taking a very, very, very hard line, to people that ask questions, essentially, because the person says, I don't have time to educate you or whatever, go out and do your own education. Like, there is truth to that, but there's also,
mm,
that bridge that needs to be built, and the
mhm,
idea isn't to just flip dynamics. It's never gonna go beyond the framework in which it already exists, if that makes
mhm,
sense. I mean, I've predominantly thought about this interestingly from like two perspectives. Like, as a feminist,
mm,
okay, what would I expect from a man? And then as a white
mm,
person, okay, what would be
mm,
expected of me? And both, I don't know. on both sides. I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know what to tell men when they say, "What should I do?" I don't know anymore.
I think what you just said was absolutely correct, and I think this is the problem. Everyone thinks there has to be one solution. Like what will solve racism and sexism? What will do it? No, it's how can you expect to dismantle something that has been festering for how many, no, hundreds of thousands of years. Like sexism, this is a long time. It's not going to be solved in a day. So what you said about asking questions and just taking baby steps and taking the time, all it needs is for, I mean, for goodness sake, it's just even the simple thing of, how can we expect to solve racism if, people are still defensive about getting a black person's name right, or calling a black woman an angry black woman. It's little
Yeah.
things first. If you can't even do that, what are we doing? Why
Yeah.
bother? Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right, about whether or not people want to give up the benefits that they have. I think it's like, oh, it's a kind of difficult language because if you talk about, like benefiting from a system of oppression, you have to talk about the global 1%, which is us, the West. We're the global 1%, we're benefiting off of everything. And yet considering like the precarization and like the decline of the middle class and all of this stuff, it's not an active oppression. Like we partake in systems that we actually cannot remove ourselves from either. Like that's one of the things that happen with democracy. So again, it's that language of like, how do we go and have conversations about the fact of, okay, you benefit from X, Y, and Z. I need you to learn about this in order to help me change it without it becoming you are just as bad as a history of
Mhm.
oppression, which unfortunately it just turns off a whole lot of people. And those are the people that we need to speak to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to find a way in and to have that,
Mm.
and to encourage people to do that self-reflection. But all you can do is encourage, because of course we can, force everyone to do that. And I have the same, I have conversations with myself about, engaging in capitalism. I live in England and I buy things from various places. I need to eat.
Yeah.
I need to wear warm clothes. Where am I going to find
Yeah.
them from? Certain things cost a certain amount of money. We're in the middle of well, there's another economic depression. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Where am I going to go to get my clothes? To get a scarf, a new heater. What am I supposed to do? These conversations are really difficult, but I think it's about owning up to the fact. I mean, someone asked me, well, are you a communist? And I said, I'm going to be selling books. I'm going to be selling words. So
Mm.
I'm not going to sit here and say that, okay, I am a perfect conscious person, when I know very well that I'm engaged, I'm buying books. Oh, these books are a
Mhm.
lot of money. Where else am I going to get them? So yes, I'm engaging in capitalism, and I have to reflect on why I'm doing that.
Yeah. But this is the thing, and like you're totally hitting the nail on the head, is essentially like we can talk about class and race and even globalization until like we're blue in the face. But
Mhm.
ultimately, until we start to tinker with and not necessarily completely dismantle, yeah, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think that, that makes me very nervous as well. But we need to address the economic systems that keep these dynamics at play, and
absolutely.
you see a lot of stuff about kind of like social entrepreneurship at the moment, and great initiatives and intentions, but perhaps not addressing the fact that they're springing up from the very roots upon which the problem was founded that they're trying to address.
Mhm.
And can we make changes in that vacuum? i, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a problem that's going to be solved anytime soon. We can make little changes. We can make people aware. We can try our best to set examples, but and I'm saying, but like there are thousands of excuses, but it simply is a very problematic and difficult issue. I would love to be able to say there's an easy answer, and I want to be able to change the world, but I
Yeah.
very much am someone who believes in doing the small things, taking baby steps and doing one thing at a time. And of course, certain things can never happen when the certain people are still in power. And that's why I say, like, things don't ever change if the same people still have the same beliefs.
Absolutely. To kind of bring all these different threads together, like what do
Mm,
you see as the poet's role in all of this? Because the word that came back with your poetry over and over and over again was joy, joy,
mm,
joy. And I
mm.
think it's a beautiful place to
Yes.
create from. So what do you see as the poet's role in all of this?
For me, I want to always come from a place of love. I want people to feel a sense of empathy. Anyone who can feel anything about my work, and hey, if you feel anger when you read my work, well, that's a good thing as well. Good, great. I hope so. Anyone who feels anything about my work, I think I will have done my job, and I think that that encourages empathy, encourages compassion, and having compassion for your fellow man is going to motivate you to want to do right by them. With that said, I'm not going to say that that is a poet's role. A poet's role is also to just observe and to speak as well, and also to observe themselves. And one thing that I remember someone recently in a workshop, a participant asked me, well, sometimes I don't want to speak about the big things. Sometimes I just want to speak about my things. And I said, you have no idea how profound you can be if you just speak about the dolly in your room. You have no idea what that can do for someone. That level of connection that you can provide as a poet will make a huge difference to someone's day, to someone's sense of self. And sometimes it's not about the big things. Sometimes it's about the small things. And yeah, I remember I've written about this before, where a man said, "Well, what's the point of poetry? You know, I don't need to know about a woman's chipped tooth or how big her smile is. You know, that's not what I need to know." And I said, "Well, hold on a minute. You just mentioned two details that no one would notice. Who talks about someone's chip in their tooth? Who talks about the width of someone's smile? The fact that a poem allowed you to notice that this woman parades scars in her mouth and she has the ability to smile that big, you've just proved your point that you would never have seen before. That's what we do. That's the power of poets. We can show you things that you might be missing, and you'll think about the world in a different way, or maybe not. But hey, you'll think, and that's nice. That's a good thing. I love poetry.
So do I. I really, really, really love it. I think it's so special. Just on its like the most basic level, what it does linguistically. You know, how it proves that words can go together that shouldn't be next to each other to just create whole new worlds. I
Hmm.
think that right there, language is, you know, the kind of foundation of society, and then what poetry can do with it. It just shows that's what we can use to change the world. When we have nothing left, we can create whole new worlds still, just with language. I love it.
Absolutely.
Just to finish up, is there somebody that you would like to platform?
I actually was thinking about this, but I had so many names that came to mind. I'm going to send an email and I'm going to I'm sorry, I have like this like I had a list and I thought, oh God, there's so many wonderful poets. So I'm going to make a few suggestions.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to your email and I'm going to work down that list. Don't you worry.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, Safiya, for coming on the show.
Thank you. Bless you.
Hello, hello. Just a reminder The Inheritance, Safia's first collection, will be out with Outspoken Press later in the year. So I urge you to sign up to their mailing list because, frankly, all of the women they're publishing this year are simply phenomenal. You can also subscribe to Platform Enterprise to get every podcast episode and newsletter delivered straight to your inbox. Sign up now at www.platformenterprise.com. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. See you next week.